We'll move on to the second presentation, which is going to come to you from Paul Arsquett, Managing Director of Branding Night, Josie Harrison, Head of Insight, and Lou Palfreman, who's Director of Innovation and Experience, all three from Branding Night, as I said. So today's presentation is titled Segmentation, Alive and Kicking. Paul and his team were asked by Domino's to examine the role of pizza in modern day Britain. What a great project that is. We'll hear how Branding Night tackled this challenge, including the ways they engaged influential stakeholders, from the NCO to operational managers, to franchisees, to supply chain managers, to agency partners, and including the marketing leads. And we'll also hear ways to champion segmentation within the business. I'm very much looking forward to this presentation. Paul, are you ready?
No, I'm ready.
Good to go. Okay, I'm going to hand over the controls to you, Josie and Lou.
Okay, thanks so much, Tom. Firstly, I just wanted to say, well, good morning, everybody. And thanks to Pete for that fantastic presentation on Beano. I'm very jealous of that kind of role. All too familiar with Roblox and Norris Nuts in my house. It's all time. And frankly, the map of hotness is genius. So we all take something from that. I think also the link between kids and parents that you were talking about in the first session is highly relevant to pizza as well, because as much as the purchaser, someone with a credit card, is going to be the adult, kids are highly influential in the choice of food that comes to the door, and whether it's going to be a pizza or something else, and whether it's going to be a Domino's if it's going to be a pizza. So we're wrapped up in a lot of very similar issues, and especially how things have been affected in the recent 2 or 3 months. Okay, so actually I slightly changed the title to Living and Breathing rather than Alive and Kicking, because that revealed far too much of my 80s upbringing, the alive and kicking bit. But living and breathing is more the point. A little bit about us. We are a customer closeness agency, 7 years old. Our role is basically to represent the customer in businesses and to inform decision making, effectively to bring the customer to the boardroom, looking from the outside in. So we often take quite an independent stance within the mix of agencies and clients and different stakeholders. Our job is to represent and understand the customer. That's our office in the top right hand corner. Just we're based in, as it's currently known, lockdown Leicester. Which makes things a little bit interesting at the moment. Our key pillars of the business are insight, which is clearly what we're going to focus an awful lot on today, but also innovation, customer experience, and brand strategy. And that comes a little bit, particularly from my background. My background's in marketing communications, advertising as a strategist and a researcher. And I'm joined, I'm sure they'll say hello now, by Josie and Lou. Are you there, guys?
Morning all.
Okay. Our kind of 2 principles for how we go about our work are that it is meaningful and transformative. So everything we do and that we play back to clients has to be useful and matter to people. I just want to say a couple of thank yous. Obviously, thank you to Tom and everyone at Aura for inviting us to take part in today. Thank you for you guys for joining us. Thank you to Domino's for allowing us to kind of share this platform. I guess that the flip side of that is I can't share too much, but as you'd all recognize, commercial sensitivity of data. So we're going to talk about the principles and the way things were done rather than what the actual results of anything particularly were. We also have our own viewing facility here called Ignition Rooms, where we conducted quite a bit of this work. So the 3 points are 10-point plan, the method of segmentation, and the living and breathing it. And I guess the one thing I did want to say, it's not that there's anything entirely groundbreaking or world-beating in the way that we've approached this. It's just very sensible and going further than anyone had before for them. And it's not about sucking eggs for anybody. This is, if there's anything useful or interesting about even one little element of the slides that we take you through that you can take away into your own businesses, then that would be fantastic. Josie and Lou, just before I get into it, do you want to just give a bit of context about your background and work in the agency?
Yes, this is Lou. Good morning, everyone. As I say, I'm actually within the lockdown zone in Leicester, so I'm having a very different experience to everybody else, and I'm extremely grateful no one can see my hair at the moment. So briefly, I've been involved in senior roles, both client side and agency side, so I like to think I can understand how those relationships can work really well together. But my focus within Brand Ignite these days, as I say, is around the customer experience and the innovation side of things. I'm part marketeer and part social psychologist, and mash those two together to hopefully make the meaningful and transformative come out of it.
Very good.
And I'm Josie. Like Lou, I've got a background in both agency and client side, but within the insight specifically. So I've worked in agencies like Hall & Partners, Brain Juicer and Kantar, and I've also done quite a lot in the sort of social research space. So my role now at Brand Ignite is to bring all of that and sort of be the link from Lou's sort of social psychology background, and use my kind of, the last few years, built my expertise and skills in behavioural insight, and kind of bringing that into the insight space and exactly how we do that for clients.
Thanks, guys. And apologies for spending a couple of minutes on that, but I guess the title of the sessions are the best agencies you've probably never heard of, and that may well be the case for the vast majority of you guys on the call. So the first thing about a 10-point plan, approaching the segmentation, this is what we did with Domino's, but it's pretty standard with our approach to segmentation generally, to make sure it is a living, breathing thing. And I think the main point is that segmentation only starts at the end of the project. So there's the technical aspect from a research point of view of creating it, but segmentation is pointless unless it actually lives and breathes within the business. So I guess our rule number one, I don't know if this is familiar to anybody in businesses they've worked in before, but it's all too easy to do a fantastic piece of work and then other things take precedent within the business, become more urgent, more pressing, and it sometimes is hard to adopt. I spoke to one potential client this year who talked to me about they had 9 different segmentations in their business, which was incredibly complex. No one knew which one to use for which purpose, and so they weren't used. So that's I guess the point here is design it to endure. Think about the process you're going to have to go through, particularly after you've done the work. Just that it's hard work for people within inside the business. Think about the support you're going to need from stakeholders. Think about the culture within the business. Is this something that people will want to adopt and get engaged with? Because change isn't for everybody. And also thinking about the timeline. So designed to endure, but it's not forever because the world changes and evolves too quickly. So quite typically 3 to 5 years might be the maximum lifetime of a segmentation before you have to refresh. And that's certainly what we'll be doing with our work. Our principle number 2 is about collaboration being queen, and the point is about all working together. It doesn't say king. When I look this up, you know, on the chessboard, the king says it's the most important part, but the queen is the most powerful within the mix, and that's certainly true for collaboration. Working together with clients and within their network, because there's an awful lot of people involved in different roles around data and insight and marketing, but also with agencies, because they will often be the comms and the media agencies will often be the people who are the most frequent users of the work. It's about having encouraging people to take part right at the front. So basically everyone's got skin in the game. They have some sense of ownership and wanting the best result for them. Number 3 is start at the end. As I said, the segmentation really starts when you've finished. You kind of start at the end and work backwards. How do you want this to be used within your business? What are the changes and differences that you're going to make? And then you write your brief to enable that so that you can make sure that you deliver the outcome you want when it comes to the end of the project. And what's going to make you feel that was a great job when you finish. The technical detail can be filled in afterwards, but it's more the concept of how it's going to be used. So number 3, start at the end. Number 4, cast your net wider. Quite often a brief can be answering a specific question, but actually sometimes we don't know how broad we need to go to find the things that are most likely to influence what the segmentation of the work's going to be. So in terms of the inputs, there's obviously client internal data. It could be things that are live, you know, sort of tracking data and that kind of stuff, and we do the tracking for Domino's. There's also publicly available published data that can be a really, really useful input into segmentation. It doesn't always have to be your own information. But also the net widening should include people, because people influencers within the mix. It's not just stakeholders, but people who have a point of view or an opinion and would like to express that within the mix. And I think the point is also to plan for the future. Don't build the segmentation just on what you know the market to be now. Where do you think it's going to be evolving? So horizon scanning, what's coming, is a really important part of building the project plan. Number 5, dig deeper. This picture because we love dogs in this agency, so there's dog beds, dog bowls and dog balls around the office. But the point is, be curious. This is about be curious. Where else could I go with my brief? What else do I want to know? Ask what you don't even know about. Some of it will probably prove quite useful. I've got a phrase that I use around this about laddering down. So quite often within strategic conversations with clients, we talk about laddering up. What's the bigger picture to everything? But actually laddering down is always asking, well, where did that come from? Why did they say that? And you get down to the nuggets, and actually quite often it's something quite hidden and apparently quite small, which makes the single biggest difference in terms of decision making for people. So dig deeper. Number 6, I guess is the first of our 2 principles about discover the meaningful. What matters most to people? And how do we know what matters most? Well, data will sometimes tell us that because there are scores from quantitative work, but certainly when we do the qual work, what matters most is often when you're talking to people and they are talking with conviction, with a big smile on their face, and their whole body language opens up, and this is something they believe in or have pride in some way, or they just talk spontaneously about it. They don't have to think too often. And it's often you as a qual researcher, you think, okay, there's something really powerful within this that we must include within it. And also look for the triggers in the meaningful. It's not the behavior perhaps that someone is undertaking, but the trigger that caused that. Number 7, imagine the transformative. Where are we going to go with this? This is the second of our principles. We're trying to create a journey to better for clients. That's the point of doing it. And a segmentation is a huge tool for creating a better future for the business and better experiences for the customer. And also thinking about the future planning, those better experiences for your customer quite possibly will not be within the framework of what you currently offer. So a big part of this, the transformative, is also in innovation within your own processes and systems and culture. And the last point, this is not a holiday snap of mine, unfortunately, but I guess these are all together. Own it, live it, breathe it. This is about believing in what you're doing, making it a priority. It has to be somebody's priority within the business. Somebody has to own it. Not necessarily one champion. In fact, I'd take a different view on that. That you need multiple champions. If you think about all your different sort of stakeholder groups, there might be different departments, different individual groups within the business. Each of those needs a champion so that they will carry this message out to their own teams and make the difference that you need to make. So that's 1 to 10. The segmentation itself, as I say, we can't show too much, but I'm going to talk you through how we approach this. And if any of you work in the food industry, then you'll recognize quite a lot of the sort of nuances here. But I think these apply to many. My background is a lot in retail and telecoms, mobile telecoms, financial services, and a lot of the same principles apply. Sometimes clients could or should be on the call. Unfortunately, once a month, Domino's have now a Zoom call with their franchisee businesses, and it's hugely important as a diary. So that's today. So that's the only reason Becky and Manveer can't join us today. There's a couple of quotes there which I won't read out, but we're very, very delighted that we've had senior and deep support for the project. So where did we come from? For this project, this was about customers in a category context. So Domino's does pretty well within other pizzas. So with the tracker work we do, there are competitors and there are always emerging competitors, and casual dining is or was until the last few months booming. But the bigger point for us is on an average Friday night, a customer may buy a pizza, but equally fish and chips or an Indian or something else. So we wanted to look at customers within the context of QSR or quick service restaurant more broadly to understand not how well we're doing at the moment, but what the missing opportunity is for the business to grow, and whether that's just through new customers or whether it's about new formats, distribution of stores, for example. There's obviously the very real growth of aggregators, which is huge within food, and it's been in financial services for a while, and it's everywhere. How do we tackle that and build forward? So it was looking from, I guess, outside the emerging category in. So we're building towards tomorrow. We didn't want to predetermine where the end solution might be. So from the left-hand side, we're thinking, well, a segmentation is to create segments. Okay, that's fine. But is that about people? Coming in from the right-hand side are the occasions that people have pizza. or some of the other ones. So on the left-hand side, the segments are about individuals, and quite often, and certainly this is the practical use of it, quite often this is about fine-tuning propositions. And when you get down to things like direct marketing, if you have 5 segments that each have a slightly different view about a deal, then you have 5 different ways of communicating the same deal. But on the right-hand side, occasions are things that everybody will deal with. All the segments will have a different involvement with their participation. So segments and occasions, and then within that, it's the decision-making journey to get there, which is partly about media channel, but also what are the hurdles that the brand needs to cover off. So they were our 3 lenses, if you like. Where we came from was a demographic segmentation that had previously been done actually by a media agency, which made complete sense at the time because it was about improving their ability to invest in media, which with the use of TGI, obviously mapping that against the segmentation makes much more effective buying decisions. But it only told you the age of somebody. What we were really interested in as an attitudinal segmentation was to explore people's relationship with food. And so the average small family with young kids who might buy a pizza, demographically they may appear similar, but the relationship with food and how they perceive food being delivered into their front door is entirely different, can be entirely different. So our work was looking at attitudes, behavior, the context of the occasion, how they feel about it, and particularly how they feel about food. So that was the step change that we wanted to make with this segmentation. What was wonderful about this piece of work is that we had obviously the insight work that we wanted to and did take them through, but Domino's is a hugely transactional rich business. So if you've ever bought a pizza from Domino's, and that's not that uncommon, then they will know who you are, where you are, they will know what toppings you had, they know what price you paid, what deal you were on, what drinks you had, the interval between purchases and so on. And so what we were able to do was fuse together our new and fresh primary insight with actual known behaviors, and that's what makes the end result hugely powerful. And if you can do that in any way at all in your own businesses, then that's definitely the way to go. There were 4 key points to our process: explore, define, develop, pinpoint, we called it. I'll happily talk you through this kind of summation of what we did. The explore was to not know who, like I say, about predetermining. So in focus group, we spoke to lots of qualitatively different groups of people who might eat together. So like I said, family units or couples or friendship groups. So that's not the segments, but they're people who typically eat together. And we wanted to understand what the drivers were for choosing and eating together, and particularly where Domino's stood out. So a large qual stage to start with. The second stage was probably the most defining within the project. So we spoke to over 6,000 Domino's customers in a quant study, which makes the findings extremely robust. We looked at lots of things to do with their attitudes. This is where the advanced analytics stage came in to ultimately identify 5 segments, but there were different possible solutions that we got to before we landed on the 5. This is where the fusing of the data happened between insight, qualitative and quantitative, with the transactional data, and that was simply by matching up unique reference numbers for a customer. So we didn't know who the individual was, but we knew their history and were able to match that against the survey data. Then when we knew, or thought we knew, that the 5 existed in their separate entities, it was then more qualitative work to explore them in more detail. And something that was really, really useful for us and got a lot of traction within the business, because it's simple to understand across a business, was some digital ethnography. We did a week in QSR. So we had, I think it was 20 or 30, I think it's 20 people who across the UK and Ireland, who literally spent 7 days with us, capturing everything within an ethnography tool, videos, pictures, thoughts, how they felt about the food and what they did over that 7-day period. And obviously Domino's played a point within that. That added a huge amount of richness. And then the final stage was to go back to a smaller quantity, but still 1,500 customers, to do a lot more of the sizing information and to make sure that the algorithm that we created for Golden Questions worked. So that was a very thorough process. It took a little while, over a number of months, but every single stage of that was worthwhile. Where we landed, and I'm sorry I can't fill this in, but where we landed was 5 segments and 9 occasions. So you create, I call it here a matrix of opportunity. If you have the time in the business to go into this granular level, it's hugely useful. So there are 45 squares on this box, and for each of those 1 squares, there is a proposition to be made, whether that's around a deal, whether that's around a food, particular offer, or something on the menu. Because for every occasion there will be 5 spins on it, and for every segment there's 9 different occasions. So there's 45 different ways in to something new to do for your audience. I think one of the interesting things, and this will be true for every segmentation, is looking at not just what pulls people apart, but actually what makes them similar. Really, really important. So at the top of this chart, high levels of common agreement across the 5 segments. These are attitudinal statements down the left. Lots of people agree with lots of things equally, and more often than not, that might be where your mass communications, the sort of stuff you might do on TV, for example, might be led. As you go further down the line, you start to see these segments pull apart, and that's where more the direct and one-to-one communications come in. So what we learned, and apologies, the picture is deliberately blurred at the bottom, and you'll hear a little bit more about this book that we created. But for each of the segments, there was a huge amount of information. So we understood the occasions they were having, not just with Domino's, but within QSR as a broad spend and activity, the share, also the usage dynamics, what they were doing, who they were having the pizza with, why, what was the driver in that moment. On the right-hand side, really illuminating passion points, which is a big thing for Domino's. What are people really interested in? And that's what drives their sponsorship and co-marketing activity. But the other brands that they buy from and why, underpinned also by the previous demographic basis as well. But really, I guess at the core was the distinctive attitudes of the group so that we can really drive growth and what's making people want to make decisions. And at the heart of it, it's a simple thing, pen portraits, but it's not that simple. It actually takes an awful lot of time to craft that. We write them in the first person as if that person has been doing that. And what I call the signature underneath, it's 3 or 4 words that that person would say to sum them up. And we find that a really useful tool. On the occasions, a little bit here on the method, I'm conscious of the time. We started in the qual about 40 occasions where Domino's perhaps has a role, and we heard all sorts of tales about breakups, sad stories, and in fact one of those made it to a TV ad last year. But that's about sort of recovery, I suppose, or a lift. There's a lot of spontaneity with pizza celebrations, but not on a big scale, but on a small scale. And there's an awful lot of just because. Domino's is quite a treat. So there was 40, and then we used analytical process, and there's a dendrogram there that you can see that kind of looks at the connections between different types of occasions, and that highlighted 11 from the 40, and then we used qual at the end to fine tune those down to the 9 that we are now working with. And those occasions, the deep insight into those, because you can market from the occasion perspective rather than necessarily the segment. The option is there to do both. So we know what they're worth, then we know the size of them currently, but also the missing pot, if you like, for pizza and therefore for Domino's. Value, because this is actual, and there's obviously a big difference, especially in retail, between actual, which Domino's do know about, and reported either for Domino's or for a trip to McDonald's. We can only go on what they've told us. The share and the volume and frequency. Down the right-hand side, really good understanding of who is enjoying that occasion, because it's not necessarily about the segment level, but is this a one person? And we know that one of our segments likes to eat alone, their pizza. So the group, is it about friendship groups? Is it family or just adults only? What are they having? When are they having it? Is it, weekdays or is it weekends? What clock hours during the day? We've got into all that sort of detail. And where are they eating? Is it in the car? Is it in their living room? Is it at the office sometimes? What's driving the choices? And for each of the segments, the penetration within those, where is, again, the opportunity to grow. And that's really a big focus for us. We're called Brand Ignite, I guess, for that reason, trying to help people understand and go somewhere, grow and develop. Okay, that's the process we went through. Lou's going to explain a couple of things now about sort of the immersion and making it come alive. Lou?
Sorry, had a little muting moment there, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Let's go.
Thank you. So, yeah, as multifaceted and as complex as I think the segmentation looks and appears, we knew that, I guess, the measure of its success was going to be the adoption of it into meaningful use across the business, so that it really did make a difference to the bottom line. As Paul said, we've seen far too many dusty folders with segmentations in not being used to drive the business forward. So I think from Brand Ignite's point of view, whenever we set out on a journey with our clients, we know that there's an element of change that needs to happen for the results to be different and for it to get traction. And it's really easy, I think, when you're embarking on these exciting projects to forget about the people, the systems, the processes, the relationships, that whole system and mix that are essential to making sure that that change will happen and stick. So I think the first thing I want to just say about this is that we always design our research from two angles. Obviously the research design itself, but the change process that needs to sit around the project. What that looks like for each client is really different, because you have to get it right for the culture of the business. But typically we might bring together our expertise in psychology, behavioural science. We use a lot of appreciative inquiry, which I'm not going to go into today, but if anybody wants to know more about that, give me a shout. I'm easy to find, because it's really powerful for engaging large audiences with different views and different opinions. And we meld that all together with a bit of design thinking to engage people in two ways. First off, at the front end for the co-creation piece. And as Paul was alluding to, if you help people engage in the co-creation, they own it and they run with it, you have a much easier job further down the line. But then in that second part, there are a group of audiences that we need to engage with. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't leave any stone unturned on this and it couldn't fall through any cracks. Obviously, the marketing function within Domino's is critical and central, and the sponsors of this project. We had a couple of easy places to start with them, which was around the MPD food innovation side of things. And I'm going to tell you more about what we actually did on that in a moment. But they also wanted to make sure that this went wider into the digital and the operations side of things. And, you know, the ops side of the business, some of them are quite a way out from their head office and aren't usually involved in some of these things, but they were very appreciative and very vocal, actually, and very important and useful in shaping that conversation so that it could be used across the business, and in particularly thinking about how to approach things from those occasions and personas within the digital sphere, which is absolutely essential to Domino's. Then we went up and across, so up into the leadership teams, both the UK and the global one. The connection to America is critical and important. We wanted to make sure we were in line and with best practice, but also making it really relevant for the UK market. And it's a franchisee business. The model is a franchisee model, and they're actually hugely important and hugely powerful in this relationship, critical to bringing it to life at the point where this meets the customer. And then, as Paul mentioned, we got a load of partners that were going to be critical to making this come to life. So we've got all the creative and comms agencies involved, all the media people, the CRM teams. It was a real multidisciplinary approach to engaging those people that support Domino's outside of head office to make it happen. We really immersed them so that they could translate into the different activation strategies that they were all working to. So can move on to the next slide, Paul. Sorry, I can't drive.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, so one of the assets, I'm not going to talk through all in the essence of time, but probably one of the most powerful things we did actually was the storybook, the book of the film, if you like. I think by far this was the thing that helped everybody at head office and the agencies beyond that really get together and understand this. We specifically avoided it being a big data dump. You know, that can really overwhelm people and fail to engage them. So we turned it into something that was very much driven by the storytelling piece to bring customers to life. And everybody wanted to read it. We were really thrilled with that. But what's more, people were really a part of it, because I think one of the magical things we did, and I'll tell you a bit more about this in a moment, is that we profiled, we profiled the people in the business. So everyone at Domino's knew where they sat in the segmentation, what their persona was, which caused a huge buzz around the business. But for me, one of the early telltale signs of something being embedded was just how often this book got used to facilitate and guide meetings, conversations, and people's general thinking. It quickly became a real tangible shared language that we were hearing everywhere across the business. And that's when I think you know you've got traction on something. So now let me tell you about something on the MPD side of things, which was a place where we started to work with it. Back one, Paul. Sorry, 2 parts to the MPD. First was looking at it beyond the food side of things, which was the first group of workshops we ran. This was really to bring that ownership to life a bit further, but to start to get some quick wins for practical application. I think getting the quick wins is one of the most important things to start to see return on investment, and therefore people want to do more against it. So we ran a series of workshops. In this workshop was when we revealed with everyone what persona, what category they fell into, which caused huge buzz and lots of chat around the business. Some people, you know, querying where they were, which was fun too. But actually the real important part of this workshop was then dividing people up into their persona groups and getting them to think about the practical applications from being in the customer's shoes to what they could do today for those quick wins. What should we think about for tomorrow and start embracing, and actually their help in getting other people within the business to adopt and become advocates for it. So the other side to our MPD, and again, sorry you can't see the picture, but these are the real ideas that came out of it. But we probably did something that was a bit eye-opening within the business actually. We wanted to engage the full supply chain in the food MPD innovation program. And we wanted to do that in a way that was co-creative, because that's the way we do things. And yes, some of those competitors, some of those suppliers rather in the chain were competitors. But we spent a lot of time going out and about, getting to know them, building safe relationships with them, and then invited them in to join us for big sessions on developing new offerings by a mixture of persona and occasion. So back to that opportunity matrix, we had hundreds of ideas pasted into each of that matrix that would speak to the opportunity for that audience. And we used an agile innovation approach to this, which basically at the end of the session, we would put the top ideas, the ones we felt that rated the best, out to our research groups and do a testing with them to see which ones resonated. So we were co-creating with their customers as well as the supply chain in real time. Exhausting, exciting and brilliant. And those ideas that rose to the top were then taken through to the more practical innovation pipeline through concept testing and taste evaluation to get the ones that are working. Yeah, so back to Paul, who's going to tell you a little bit more about what that shaped up to after that.
Paul, can I just quickly interject to say we are now eating into question time. We do have a hard close at 10:50.
Thanks, Tom. I'll take 30 seconds, last 2 slides.
Okay.
Because this is some practical stuff. So mapping back to media buying tools is really, really important. I talked about that earlier. So we made sure that there were inputs from TGI into the segmentation questionnaires. So media consumption, attitudinal statements, we borrowed or deliberately included quite a number from TGI, so that at the end it could be mapped back. And now the agencies in using TGI and TELMAR now have proxy versions, if you like, of our segmentation, because obviously our segmentation questions don't appear on those platforms, but they have now created equivalents, which is hugely useful, and it's bespoke, it's only for Domino's, and it's a very powerful tool to use. And the second thing is you'll probably all be familiar with the golden questions. This is how we've constructed it for Domino's. There's 3 levels depending on the usage. You know, sometimes for recruiting for qual work, you need to be a little bit similar, depending on how you're doing the recruitment, or sometimes for the bigger things, you for the large, small, medium, large, it would normally be gold, silver, bronze or something, but it's just pizza language. And I think the other thing is, obviously, we've built this into everything we do now. So all of our research is done through the segmentation with the golden questions, but we've also built in a live algorithm to our platform because we prefer to do that. So you can do live screening. So if you only wanted to research one particular segment, you can actually do that and helpfully, tell the other 4 of the segments, thank you very much for your time, and focus on the one, which saves money and time for clients. Whew. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry,
Super. Thank you very much. No, that's excellent. I say we really do have a hard close today because we'll be moving on to the second session. So there are a couple of questions in the Q&A from Ruth Hinton. First of all, this does look like a really exciting and robust approach. When a client doesn't have the time or money to do the full process, which parts would you prioritize as the most meaningful and transformative?
Ooh, good question. Well, thank you for using the word exciting for a start. That's good. I think you start from within because as much as people like us will help you create the segmentation, often a lot of clients will already have the information they need. So time and investment can start and should start from what do we already know that we can use to our advantage. I think meaningful and transformative, well, I would say that meaningful is likely to come from qualitative work more. So if you're going to do anything, you might have the data in the organization to add a richness layer of qual around the edge to do something simple and quick around that area if time and budget was limited. On transformative, it's going to be much more likely to come from something quantitative because you can look at prioritization or use max-diff techniques to understand what will make the single biggest difference. And sometimes you just don't need it to be as technically rich as what we've got here. We've just done a project with a grocer, main high street grocers, looking at personas for their web, bit of CX research, online UX research. And that was a relatively light touch, but extremely useful for creating content. So start from within and build out slowly. And if you have the wonderful assets that Domino's have got, then use them, basically.
Okay, great response. Great advice. Potentially start with portraits and then build up from there. The second question from Ruth is, when people query whether they have personally been allocated in the right segment, how do you handle this so it doesn't derail the conversation or lose their support?
I'm guessing you mean sort of internal people. So obviously a customer would never know because they just have a kind of a vocabulary that is leaning towards them and they think, oh, this brand understands me. So they would never know and we would never label it. Internally, well, it's interesting. When we did do the workshop sessions, quite a bunch of people, there were some people who wanted to be seen more of connoisseurs of food, and actually the segmentation suggested that they were in some of the other groups where they just wanted the hit of taste at that moment. It's just illuminating about relationships with food, and actually the people who thought they were in the wrong section often said, well, do you know what, actually that's probably the truth if I think about it really. So it's such a robust process that there was no losing support. It was just, that's really interesting. And actually to find common people, the point here is demographically you're not the same as the person next to you, but you have the same relationship, and so it opened up lots of conversations rather than closing them down.
Okay, do you have equal sized segments?
No.
Were you concerned about that at all?
No, I mean they range. So we have one that is larger and one that is smaller, but there's only a 9-point difference between those sizes. There was potentially a 6th segment that was too niche and actually wouldn't be used. I think that's really important. Come back to my first point is make sure you're building this, designing this to have full effectiveness and utility within the business. So we didn't do that. They're close enough within 9 points of each other. So they all are large enough and they obviously have millions of customers to be able to use and make a difference with.
Okay, very practical. One final question. You mentioned a unique reference number. Is that a personal reference number or a household reference number?
No, so the Domino's data, just to obviously protect the individuals, we were given a file of a lot of customers. I won't go into the detail, but all we basically had was a URN. So we didn't know who the person was. So we matched our survey responses or survey invitations, if you like, to that unique. So person number one, we know what their survey responses were, and then we know what their transactional data was. We just don't know who they were. So we were just able to match up the two by working with the Domino's data teams.
Okay, and then maintained anonymity, no doubt.
Exactly, yeah.
Absolutely fantastic, Paul and Lou and Josie. Super presentation. There are lots of further questions I could ask, but I'm afraid we're going to have to stop at this point because that's us hit 10:50. So thank you very much again for giving that presentation, and to Pete for the other presentation from the Beano Studios.